Great. Yeah, so my name's Tanner. I was in cohort 2. My background briefly, I've worked in international NGOs in New York, across impact investing firms in India and here in London, and then worked at tech startups whose software is focused on the eradication of social and environmental problems. So I did my research on how social enterprises scale technology to the bottom of the economic pyramid in emerging markets by doing a single case study on the UK-based company Simprints. And just so why this is important, we live in a world where we have a rapid growing population. Currently 7.5 billion people. By 2050, we're set to reach 9.8 billion people. The compounding effects of population growth are going to strain our various systems, from education to healthcare to natural resources to government systems. And so social enterprises whose fundamental reason for existence is the eradication of social and environmental issues, it is imperative that, assuming their product or service is effective, that they scale because they create greater social and environmental impact on the beneficiaries that they're serving. Secondly, social enterprises, generally speaking, are for-profit entities. And especially in the context of bottom of the pyramid emerging markets, they typically operate under a low-cost, high-volume model. What that means is that they're selling their products for really cheap, but in order to sustain cash flow, they have to sell a lot of it. So scale is important for social enterprises for those two reasons. My research question was, how do social enterprises successfully scale technology to the bottom of the pyramid in emerging markets? And so I did my research on the UK-based, Cambridge-based actually, social enterprise called Simprints. Simprints provides biometric identification in the form of hardware and software to the bottom of the pyramid in emerging markets. So that's actually their product right there. It's a fingerprint scanner coupled with software. And the reason this is important is because 1.1 billion people in the world lack codified identity. What that means is they don't have birth records, they don't have dental records, they don't have passports or anything. And this precludes them from basic goods and services such as access to bank accounts, access to healthcare, access to education, access to housing, etc. So this is how Simprints work before we dive into the key findings. But Simprints takes their product, sells it to frontline organizations. Those frontline organizations then train the frontline workers, and those frontline workers, who are the arbiters of trust and the ambassadors for the Simprints product, work with the local communities to gain their trust, consent, and then inevitably gain their fingerprints. So my research methods, very quickly, I used a grounded theory approach. I did 13 formal interviews, used a field diary, and then did some digital news aggregation. And so my key findings, the first one is co-creation with the global north and south. This was really interesting because they simultaneously were doing user-centered use case design in Bangladesh whilst simultaneously co-creating the technology here in Cambridge, and also with companies in New York and other Silicon Valley and other tech hubs. The second one was they did in-country training sessions, so they actually realized that you couldn't just chuck tech over the wall. Tech is not a silver bullet by any means. You actually have to build capacity in the local markets. And so they scaled by doing in-country training sessions with their partner organizations. The third way that they scaled was they had multiple pilot projects across different industry verticals, sectors, and geographies. So this effectively allowed them to see all the major pain points their product was going to have in real time. And then the last one is legitimacy. So through accessing different rounds of financing via reputable name brand partners like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or USAID or UK Aid, they got unsolicited media exposure, which resulted in organic inbound leads for them. And then subsequently, they had data capturing frameworks at the start. So they were conveying to their stakeholders demonstrably how they were creating impact for their beneficiaries in real time. So to dive a little deeper on this, Simprints was actually, one of the co-founders was actually a PhD candidate here at the University of Cambridge. And he was studying BRAC. And BRAC is Bangladesh's largest NGO. And so when they started off, they were actually doing use case designs with BRAC in Bangladesh, talking with the field workers, talking with the managers, talking and actually engaging the local communities whose fingerprints they were going to take to see what type of product or service they could actually create as a solution. And what they realized was they actually couldn't take off-the-shelf fingerprint scanners and just chuck them into the field, primarily because of environmental conditions, heat, connectivity in rural areas. And actually, most of the people in the bottom of the pyramid were agrarian farmers, so their fingerprints were calloused. So they had to build a brand new product from scratch. So they took these insights from the field, and they would leverage their own internal team's expertise, but then leverage tech mentors here in the Cambridge cluster, and then also consult with leading tech firms around the world to build a robust product. For multiple pilot products, they had one core product offering, and this is quite unique. That allowed them, that was sector agnostic. So their design principle at the very start was let's make a product that can be sector agnostic, geographically agnostic, and can function across a wide variety of contexts. This enabled them to do multiple pilot projects, which resulted in rapid learning. So they were aggregating all the data across different cultures, geographies, and environments to effectively create a robust MVP at the start. In-country training sessions, what they found at the start, again, that you can't just chuck tech over the wall and assume it's going to work. When they were in the field, they actually realized that a lot of the programs weren't designed to incorporate the Simprints technology. So they had to actually go, they would spend 1 week in the field with their partners to train up the frontline workers. And that made the frontline workers have the ability to articulate and troubleshoot technical problems when the product wasn't working, and it would allow them to clearly articulate the benefits to the bottom of the pyramid for which they had to get consent and were the arbiters of trust in those communities. And that resulted in an easy and comfortable use towards the bottom of the pyramid, because if they didn't consent to using the technology, they couldn't use the technology, and if that didn't happen, then clearly Simprints could not grow and scale. And finally, the fourth finding is legitimacy. So they accessed rounds of capital from, again, Gates Foundation, USAID, UK Aid, and that resulted in unsolicited media exposure. And in fact, one of Simprints' partners found them through reading an article on The Economist. And so they reached out and said, hey, read about you in The Economist. Can we do a partnership together? And then reporting on impact. So at the very start, imperfect as their data frameworks, imperfect as they were at the start, they realized that they should create data capturing frameworks that would allow them to assess how their product or service was actually creating impact for the beneficiaries that they were serving. And they had that data, which unlocked new rounds of capital and further bolstered their legitimacy because they weren't greenwashing. And so the areas of future research from this is co-creation is not necessarily a new idea by any means, but what's interesting in the case of Simprints is they were simultaneously co-creating in the global north and in the global south. And that requires a unique set of cultural competencies within an organization. And so future area of research is researching how organizations simultaneously co-create in different contexts with different actors. The second area of research is the critical role of pilot projects. There's two main ways that you can scale. The first is a going wide approach, like going across different markets, market A, B, C, or choosing one market, market A, and then selling your product to different market segments within the population. And so for social enterprises, this is particularly unique. And so further area of research would be a comparative research looking on how social enterprises scale by taking a go wide or a breadth or a depth approach. The third area of research is the importance of frontline workers. This has not been researched in the slightest in the academic literature. Most social enterprises, especially in the case of Simprints, they scaled through the frontline workers. If the frontline workers weren't comfortable with the technology or didn't clearly articulate it, the benefits of it, then Simprints could not have scaled. So for social enterprises that have a tech component and that are working with the bottom of the pyramid, more research needs to be done on understanding how frontline workers can help build capacity and help these organizations scale. And finally, the fourth area that needs more research is how impact reporting, collecting data and reporting that to key stakeholders bolsters legitimacy, not only in the eyes of funders and board members, but also in the eyes of the wider market. So that's me. Feel free to reach out, and thanks for listening.